and me and a camera.
And even when you had no idea who the hell I was, you let me sign here.
I did. You know, it was the year
Hello.
that you and
Hello.
Steve Hamilton both published. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we came out the same year. We matriculated in the same year.
Both sides of Lake Superior. I still remember it. Steve will actually be here Thursday. I couldn't work it out for him to be here tonight.
Oh, that would have been a hoot.
It would have been great. Right. So anyway, whenever we're live, Patrick, I'll start this. We are live. Wonderful. Well, good evening, everyone, once again. Thank you, virtual audience, for joining us. Today is the publication party for Kent Krueger and his new book, Spirit Crossing. So a toast to you, my dear.
And to you.
And to everyone who came.
Thanks for coming, folks.
Love it. Should be Ham's beer. Joke, but it's actually rosé. And as I mentioned earlier, we cheated because we've been out drinking before this all started. But I would like you to know that Kent exercised terrific restraint. And while I ate the focaccia with the garlic, Kent didn't. So you will be safe in the signing line. I mean, that's a really good point, which it hadn't occurred to me that it could be bad for your PR.
Well, as I was telling you, I heard a really famous, terrific author speak once, and I stood in the line to have him sign my book. And the only thing I really remember from that whole evening was how horrible his breath was. It was all garlic. So I'm very careful. I brushed my teeth before I came this evening, everybody.
And I have made sure that no witches are going to attack this event, right? by eating the garlic, right. So can this actually be the 20th Cork O'Connor?
Number 20 in the Cork O'Connor series. Can you? I hardly believe it.
Wow. Think of all the years we've been together, because in addition to Cork, you have written several other books.
Yeah, I think if I am counting correctly, I have 24 novels to my credit at this point.
So we've been doing this together for 24 different years. It's amazing. Actually, the bookstore is turning 35 in October, and I'm happy to tell you that Michael Connolly is going to come and celebrate with us, and Jack Reacher will be holding the microphone
Oh
at
my
the
gosh.
church. And Ian Rankin is going to join us from Scotland on Zoom on the actual day. So we have big plans for October, so I'll send you a list, but it would be fun. I am told that there will be cake. Which makes me slightly nervous in case I'm Marie Antoinette here, heralding the demise of the bookstore, but hopefully not. Right. So 20 books in. How have you managed, my love, to keep this series so fresh every single time and avoided tropes and stalemates?
Well, I'm not sure I avoid tropes. There are certain things that readers expect in a mystery, and I try to satisfy those expectations. At the same time, I try to do things that keep me interested and excited about the writing itself, and that I hope will keep readers interested and surprised occasionally on how I go about telling the stories. But for me, the secret in terms of the Cork O'Connor series is I made probably the earliest, best decision I made in terms of writing the series was that I was going to write a series in which the characters would age. I would have a dynamic protagonist. So what's a dynamic protagonist versus like a static protagonist? Static protagonist, that's somebody who never changes, somebody who's the same book to book to book. Think Sherlock Holmes. You know, you've read one Sherlock Holmes story, he's going to be the same guy in all the other stories you read. What's a dynamic protagonist? That's somebody who changes, somebody who ages, somebody for whom what happens in one of the books in the series is reflected in subsequent entries in how that character responds to the world. So when I started the series, Cork was a man of about 40. The manuscript I'm writing right now, he is turning 60. So he's gone, he, his family, all of the adjunct characters have gone through a lot in their lives. They've grown, they've aged, they've changed how they see one another, how they see the relationship with the world has all grown as the series has grown. And so that's kept it really fresh for me. Whenever I sit down to write a new book in the Cork O'Connor series, I'm not writing about the same people I wrote about last time. They've changed. And I like that. I like being a part of that journey.
So people, additionally to Cork, have aged and come and gone. A couple have died.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been hard for you to write characters that you really liked who leave us?
Boy, I should say, yeah, that was really hard. But the truth is, I am so willing to go where the story dictates. Every storyteller understands that at some point a story takes on an energy of its own, and you have to be willing to let that story go where it wants to go, regardless of the consequences. So I have done things to characters in my book, particularly killed characters that readers love, because that's what the story asked of me. Yep.
However, I've given him a stern talking to over wine about Henry. And it's not, I mean, I would like to say that I am older than Joe Biden, and I was really offended for various reasons when they just talked about him being old, because they think that character is more determinant of how somebody is going to perform. I said we wouldn't be political, but I am standing up for octogenarians, of which I am one, only in that sense that everybody ages differently. And I really think that Henry, it's perfectly credible that Henry is still Henry, even if he is now a centenarian.
Yes, I'm writing him in the current manuscript. He's 107 years old, but he's still is pretty spry for 107 years old. But this is fiction. I can have Henry, and in true life, people are living longer. I listened to a report on NPR not too long ago about a woman who was 104 who was the sole caregiver for her 99-year-old brother. They lived by themselves. She took care of them. And I went, well, what the hell?
Well, they're athletes. I'm trying to remember the nonagenarian that did some kind of swimming thing recently. So, it's all... I mean, one of the reasons that I love having the bookstore is that it keeps me from becoming isolated and static at home, right? Here I am, right? It's good for me. So I think that Henry, because...
That's why I do events, Barbara. Keeps me from being static at home.
I thought you were going to say it keeps me from being static at home to come down here and talk to you. But no, I mean, I think Henry, it would be very hard to let him go. But you have introduced a new character a while back, a young character who I think is fabulous and who is probably going to take on at least some of Henry's traits if he hasn't already.
Well,
Tell us about Waboo.
We'll have to see about Waboo. Little Waboo. Waboo is Cork's grandson. Cork's daughter Jenny literally found Waboo under a rock and saved him and eventually adopted him. And so he is Cork's grandson. And in Spirit Crossing, we begin to see that Waboo had... Stephen, if you have followed my series, Cork's son, has had visions all his life. And we are beginning to see in Spirit Crossing that Waboo has much the same unusual ability as Stephen, maybe even a little more powerful than Stephen's ability.
It's so charming because he's a child, and yet, I find him an entrancing character. And it's great that you have not only lost characters, but introduced new ones as this series has gone on.
Well, that's life, isn't it?
It is life.
People leave the stage, other people's enter.
Right. So going back to what you had to say about keeping things fresh, one thing that you have done with great success is that you have written books that are not Cork O'Connor books, and they have been energizing for you. They've been very successful. Do you feel like when you have gone off and written This Tender Land or one of your other books that you come back to Cork with more energy?
Oh, absolutely, I do. The first standalone I did was the fourth novel I wrote. It's one I seldom talk about. It's a book called The Devil's Bed. Anybody here read The Devil's Bed? Yeah, you are the only 4 or 5 people who, in the entire universe, who did, in fact, read The Devil's Bed. But I needed a break from Cork. I'd been writing Cork for many, many years at that point, and wanted to try something different. The Devil's Bed, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a thriller. It's a political thriller, really. And I wanted to try something different. When after I wrote The Devil's Bed, I came back to the Cork O'Connor series, and my next 2 novels in this series both won Anthony Awards. So I came back with really a lot more energy and commitment to the series. And so when I write a standalone, it is a very refreshing experience for me. And typically while I'm writing a standalone, toward the end of the creation of that initial manuscript, I'll begin to think about the next Cork O'Connor novel, and that'll be processing in my head while I'm finishing the current project.
So one of the things that makes your book so fabulous is that you really like introducing themes or current events in society and so forth. Do you find that some of the things I remember that Kent sent me? I'm going to go blank on is the second or the third one going down the Mississippi.
This Tender Land.
This Tender Land. He sent it to me and asked me if I thought. I'm trying to remember what exactly you asked me, but anyway, he asked me to read it and give him feedback about it. So, were you uncertain about that book, or what was it that prompted you to send it to me? This is well before publication.
How many of you read one of my standalones called Ordinary Grace? I love you folks.
I remember now why you were worried.
So I wrote Ordinary Grace, and Ordinary Grace was had this extraordinary reception from critics and readers alike. It won tons of awards when it came out. It's so far been translated into more than 24 foreign languages and has sold more than 1 million copies. And that, when I did a standalone, was what people expected of me, I thought. And then I wrote This Tender Land, which is a very different kind of a story.
It is, but I remember what your question to me was, would people be disappointed or if it wasn't a sequel to
Ordinary Grace?
Ordinary Grace, was it okay if it was a different book? And, and I certainly thought it was, but I also think that you've never really lost sight of some of the broad themes that you write about family and about, faith and about kindness and about adventure, all kinds of things that are really at the heart of all your stories.
So that's it exactly. What I write about are people, their relationships, the complexities of who they are. And so that goes into their spirituality, that goes into the moral fiber of them, which typically are not things you're going to find in a murder mystery, right? And so what my standalones in particular allow me to do is to go more deeply into some of those issues because they're important to me. If you look at the Cork O'Connor series, for example, you're going to see that very often in those stories there's an undercurrent that deals with a spiritual journey. It's something that comes really naturally for Cork because he's a man of mixed heritage. So he has a foot in his Irish Catholicism tradition and a foot in his Ojibwe spirituality. So very often in the stories he's trying to figure out where his unique spiritual path lies. And that's been an issue for me my whole life. So I wrote Ordinary Grace with the idea of wanting to explore that theme more deeply. The importance, I think we're all on a spiritual journey, whether you embrace that or not. And I wanted to talk more about the importance of the spiritual journey in our lives. I wrote This Tender Land for a couple of reasons. One was that well, all my life I'd wanted to write a book that would pay homage to Mark Twain. So this was going to be sort of my updated version of Huckleberry Finn. But it would also allow me to explore the question of who we are at heart as human beings, particularly during periods of great privation, like the Great Depression, which was one of the reasons I set that novel in the Great Depression. During these periods, and we just came through the pandemic. During these periods, are we the kind of people who retreat into ourselves and protect only those things that are important to us, or are we the kind of people who open our arms and despite how little we might have, we're willing to share that with others? I wanted to explore that theme. Also the issue of how poorly we have treated our Native brothers and sisters. That's huge in This Tender Land. But if you look at This Tender Land, it's also a question of spirituality once again. So I love the standalones because they're able to allow me to dig more deeply into some of these important issues. But let me say something about mysteries. In the old days, we had what was called the social novel. Theodore Dreiser, Upton Sinclair. These were novels that took on important social issues of the day to make a reading population more broadly aware of them. We don't have that anymore, and I think mysteries really have taken that place.
Yep, there's a certain muckraker quality. You're
Absolutely.
Right.
If you look at so many of the fine mysteries these days, they take on the social issues of the day, and they couch that within a really good, compelling mystery, and people then are made aware of a problem that exists out there.
Yeah, but it's kind of a natural for mystery because conflict is one of the reasons that people end up killing each other. hopefully not domestically or anyone you know, but nonetheless. And so when there is social change, when there are things happening, it does create conflict, which can lead to crime.
Oh, absolutely.
So, so it's kind of a natural, I think, for. And also there are events that lend themselves. I don't know if you remember going back to Chicago when there was a terrible flood in Chicago. God, I remember how many years ago. 15 years ago, something like that.
Well, you're Chicago. You would remember
Well,
that.
I don't
I'm
remember.
Minnesota. We only hear,
Sorry.
very vague things about Chicago.
Whenever it was, there were terrible things associated with that. And I remember saying to our staff that Sarah Paretsky would write her next book would have the flood in it. It would be, in fact, premised on the fact of this terrible event in Chicago. And
Well,
the
think
things that
about
have
James
happened.
Lee Burke and Tin Roof Blowdown after Katrina. Terrific book about the effect of that hurricane on the New Orleans area.
Very true. And there are very few books about the pandemic. Most authors have chosen to write around it, but there are a few that have really explored the dynamics. An Irish author named Catherine Ryan Howard wrote a particularly wonderful book about being isolated with people in the pandemic, and Val McDermott wrote a very good book about Edinburgh. They had such strict rules in the UK that it led to a lot more ethical and conflict difficulties than we experienced here. I mean, Arizona was fairly casual about the pandemic compared to other places. So those of us who lived here probably had fewer ethical issues than we were allowed to stay open the entire time. We didn't open to customers, but the staff was allowed to come to work, and so.
And as we were talking, I did
you were here.
I did a virtual event
That's
here,
right.
just you and me,
and you were not,
Patrick running the
that's
camera.
right.
I think.
And you were not the only author who chose to arrive and do their signing and do the streaming from the store, protecting all of you. And, curbside delivery and all those good things.
Yep.
But anyway, so I think people had a different pandemic depending on where they were and, what their position was and so forth. But I'm not sure how many people want to write about it. But I wanted to go back to this tender land. The Mississippi is like such a life force, and it really is our heartland. And I think to write about the river. And I was so inspired by that Minneapolis hosted a major mystery conference called BoucherCon, and every year there's an international mystery conference that takes place. This year it's in Nashville. Last year it was San Diego, and it was either 1 or 2 years ago, which was it, that it was in Minneapolis. Okay, so I said to my husband, if we're going to go to Minneapolis, I have always wanted to go down the Mississippi. Kent has prompted me to take this trip. And so we looked it up, and amazingly, there was an actual riverboat on American Cruise Line, which turned out to be beautiful, that went from St. Paul, or Redfern, Minnesota, not actually St. Paul, to St. Louis, but not really St. Louis, Altoona, Illinois. But still, the St. Paul to St. Louis sounded a lot better than Redfern to Altoona. But anyway, it was a week, and we went down it, and I thought so much about, in fact, I took your book along and reread it. And it was the upper Mississippi rather than the lower Mississippi that really kind of grabbed me. My dad grew up in Iowa, in Perry, Iowa, and the river
In Perry?
He did.
Oh my goodness.
He was a football hero.
Okay.
He was an All-American, my dad, back in the days when that was really hard to do for Northwestern. Right. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience to reconnect with the Midwest and take that trip down the Mississippi. And I'm not sure I would have done it if I hadn't read your manuscript.
Well, when you have something as iconic as the Mississippi, one of the truly great rivers of the world, and you can't ignore it, it speaks to you. In the same way, if you've ever been to Minnesota, we have Lake Superior, one of 10% of the world's fresh water is in Lake Superior. It's that huge. So when you have something like that, you've got to make it a character in your stories.
And your third book, as a matter of fact, really took advantage of Lake Superior.
Yep, absolutely.
I love that book. It was wonderful. And I mentioned Steve Hamilton earlier, and his series was set on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So he was on the east side of Lake Superior looking west, whereas Kent is in Minnesota looking looking east, right?
Yep.
To Lake Superior. So anyway, so let's talk a bit about Spirit Crossing. Why did you title it Spirit Crossing? It's the perfect title for this book. Was it yours, or did somebody else suggest it?
The titles are all mine. I have never had a title suggested by my
That's
publisher.
amazing. Really?
Yep. Sometimes
might
I've
even
given them a title they didn't like, and I had to come up with another one. But it's always my title. Spirit Crossing spoke to me very early on as the title. Sometimes I have to wait for a while before I see the title come to me in the book. This one spoke to me very early on because I had a sense of what I wanted to do in this story.
You have no idea how unusual that is, because the publishers actually have a right to title the book and do the artwork and so forth. And occasionally they let the author have a say, but that's really unusual that you would get to do that.
Well, I'm going to have to write to my publisher and say thank you very much.
No, don't rock the boat. Stick
No,
with it.
I have such a great relationship with my
Yeah, you do,
with my
and they're a
publisher.
great publisher, and you've been with the same publisher.
I have from the very
entire time,
beginning.
and that too.
24 books with
That's
them.
right. That's really unusual too. But seriously, it is amazing that you have titled your books yourself. So why did Spirit Crossing speak to you?
So here's the down and dirty on Spirit Crossing. It opens in mid-July. Anybody who knows the North Country of Minnesota knows that in mid-July it's blueberry season, wild blueberries. So it's mid-July, blueberry season, and the book opens with Cork and some of the male members of the O'Connor clan out picking blueberries, when Wabu, Cork's 7-year-old grandson, stumbles across a grave in the blueberry patch. At first, it's thought that it might be the grave of a white girl who's been missing for a couple of weeks, the daughter of a very wealthy family. But when they exhume the body, they discover that it's actually that of a native girl. And as soon as the white authorities realize that it's native, they lose interest and go back to looking for the missing white girl. And it falls to Cork and the newly formed Iron Lake Tribal Police to solve the murder of the Native American girl.
Before you go any further, how did they know she was murdered? Is there evidence in the skeleton? I mean, why is it? Because, I mean, possibly she could have just been buried in the blueberry patch.
No, there is evidence. There is Cork's son-in-law, Daniel English, was a Native American game warden for the tribe, but he is now part of the tribal police, so he's been trained in everything that a good police officer ought to be trained in, and he's able to see the signs that speak to how this girl died. He knows pretty much how the girl dies, and the autopsy confirms it. So there.
It's a mystery. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, but there's a lot going on in this story. There is a controversy, a protest over the building of an oil pipeline. That's very familiar in the Northwest for us. There is a health crisis that has a profound impact on the O'Connor clan, and there is a brutal murderer who has, in order to cover his tracks, targeted little Wabu for assassination. It's really a good story, with a lot going on, and at the heart of it really is an issue, an important issue in the Native community, the issue of MMIP, murdered and missing Indigenous people. It's a huge issue in the Native community, and I've been working with folks in the Ojibwe community for a very long time, so I've known about this issue for quite a while, and I thought it's time to try to make a white reading, what is basically a white reading population, more aware
That really
of this.
came up with, is her name Gabby Petito? Do I remember that correctly? The young white woman who was missing for so long, and that created a lot of comment about, that.
You look for white girls, but you don't look for the missing
Exactly.
Native
I
people.
mean, we've had a number of Indigenous women missing and murdered here, for sure. But
The BIA estimates that there are more than 4,200 unsolved missing and murdered cases right now. It is a huge crisis in the Native community, and so I wanted to explore that. I wanted to explore the reasons why these cases go unsolved, and they are myriad. Jurisdictional issues are huge. When you imagine, think about the difficulty in tribal jurisdiction, state jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction. And it gets very confused in rural, very often in rural law enforcement situations. The rural law enforcement officers aren't particularly interested in pursuing a case involving a Native person. So, there are all kinds of reasons why these don't get solved.
Well, interestingly enough, we have a reservation here on East Scottsdale, the Pima Reservation, and there have been several instances of chases for bad actors of one sort or another, where the Scottsdale or Mesa police come to a shrieking halt at the edge of the Pima Reservation, whereupon those law enforcement people have to take over. So anytime there is a tribal federal boundary and other law enforcement, then things can get tangled up or impeded. They try to cooperate, but it isn't always that easy.
Absolutely. Minnesota, they're working on that very hard and having some success now.
And it's true in Oklahoma, too. We had an author named, I think her name was Vanessa Lilly. Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm missing Patrick because when we were just doing Zoom events, he uses the chat function to tell me all the stuff I can't remember. I love it. But I think her name was Vanessa Lilly.
I blurbed her book.
Oh, well, then it was Vanessa Lilly. And she was writing about the same thing in Oklahoma, right? Where there was a serious, a lot of missing and probably murdered Indigenous women.
You can go anywhere, not only in the United States, but in Canada, and it's a huge issue for all Indigenous people.
Yeah, no, Canada's had a First Nations problem for, all kinds of issues, for sure. But
so I was compelled to write this book for many, many reasons, and that among them. Before I went ahead with the writing, I checked in with all of my friends in the Native community, and I asked them, okay, I'm a white guy. I have no Native heritage in me whatsoever. Will you trust me with this issue? And they, to a person, said, yeah, go for it.
You wrote an earlier book called Red Knife, in which you also talked about problems on a reservation.
Red Knife dealt with drug and gang cultures on the reservation. Wendigo Island dealt with sexual trafficking of vulnerable Native women and children. So it is so challenging to be Native in our culture. There are so many things that you have to overcome. They go back to the shattering of your culture generations ago.
Plus, Minnesota's a border state, which, here in Arizona, we think the only border that counts is the southern border, but that's not true. Minnesota, Montana, Maine, Michigan, lots of
we border
states.
that very dangerous neighbor up north. Oh.
Up until I don't even remember when, it was wonderful that, we didn't have any barriers going back and forth. Do any of you remember when you could go to Canada with your driver's license? And it's not that easy now. We're getting ready to take a trip to which we have to drive from New York to Montreal and then sail down the St. Lawrence and all. And we just got a notice from the tour company saying, you have to have a passport and you have to have this and you have to have that, and that never used to be the case. We had the longest, peaceable border in the world between Canada and the United States. And I think it really still is.
Those kinds of legalities have changed, but the smuggling that goes on across the border, particularly in northern Minnesota, unchanged. It's the same as ever.
Smuggling what?
Cigarettes, booze, drugs, you name it.
We had an author here named Stephen Graham Jones from Detroit who pointed out to us, another good point to remember here in Arizona, that the most porous border and where the most people cross into the United States is actually in Detroit, because you can't patrol the lake in the same way that you can control the land, the southern border. And that was a wake-up call. I hadn't really thought about that. So, here we are.
I wrote about that in Northwest Angle.
That's right.
Yep.
So, what else would you like to say about Spirit Crossing?
I think you should buy multiple copies of it. It's Definitely worth giving to your whole family and all of your friends. No, it's number 20. It's number 20 in the Cork O'Connor series, and I haven't lost my enthusiasm for spending time with Cork and his family and Henry Malou and Tamarack County, and I just count that such a blessing. If you'd asked, I began writing the Cork O'Connor series back in the spring of 1992. If you'd asked me back then if there were going to be 20 books in this series, I said, you're nuts. But here we are. Here we are.
Yeah, no, indeed, here we are. Talk to us a little bit about movie or streaming or television or whatever it is news.
Yeah, we were talking about this while we drank wine. So the Cork O'Connor series has been optioned, and it'll probably end up, if in fact it happens. Dealing with Hollywood is such a bizarre experience, but if it actually happens, it'll probably be created as a series for one of the streaming platforms. And the two guys who are responsible for this, a guy named Jim Kohlberg and his partner Luke Parker Bowles. Parker Bowles, does that ring a bell for you folks? Yeah, this is Camilla's nephew. He's just a wonderful guy. They actually came out to Minnesota about 3 weeks ago. They wanted to go up and see the North Country, and they wanted to meet a real Indian. So I took them up to a powwow. They were having a powwow at the East Lake for the Mille Lacs Band that weekend, and they loved that. And then I took them to up to Ely to the North Country, showed them what the Boundary Waters was really like, and we ended up on the North Shore of Lake Superior. There's a place north of Duluth called Palisade Head, this beautiful promontory where you can see practically all the way to the other side of the lake. That's an exaggeration. It's so huge you cannot see to the other side of the lake. But it knocked their socks off, and they went away promising that they were going to do their best to make a great series out of this and stay true to the heart of the stories. So we'll see what happens. I've been dealing with Hollywood since the first book came out, but I really have a sense this time it might happen.
Wow, I certainly hope so. And streaming long-form television is so much better for novels than just making a movie. It's too hard to cram a complicated story into 120 minutes or fewer. In fact, Ian Rankin, I mentioned him earlier. Ian Rankin, and I talked about it for a long time. He actually bought back the rights to the original series that was made from his Edinburgh detective because they had compressed each book into 60 minutes or fewer with commercials. And now they've redone them in the UK, and they're streaming, and it's a whole new thing. But
six episodes or 7 episodes or 8 episodes.
But he said all along that his books were too complex to be just a TV episode, whatever.
Yep.
So I think streaming has been an absolute gift for exploring novels, and particularly great for long series where there's multiple books and multiple things that can be explored.
Think about Diana Gabaldon in the Outlander series. Yep.
You could never have made a single movie out of Outlander. It would have been disastrous.
And Diana Gabaldon, I mentioned her because the guy who is responsible for having the option was the executive producer on the Outlander series.
Last night, interestingly enough, I did a Zoom event with Kathy Reichs and with Hart Hansen, who created Bones, the series that ran for 12 seasons, which is one of the longest ever. But it was, in fact, regular television. So I asked Hart and Kathy if there was any possibility that they might reconstitute Bones, but do it in long-form television, so there would be an opportunity to explore her more complicated books.
Because what they often do, and I know this was true of Longmire's, is they have the shtick, they know what the series is, and then they write their own stories in the writer's room. Whereas if they reconstitute it, they could actually take Kathy Wright's work and create from each book several episodes.
Absolutely. Plus, she did a lot of the writing. She was he is very proud of the fact that she agreed to write some of the episodes for Bones and learned how to write scripts, which is a very different thing from writing a novel. So maybe you'll get that opportunity to, write a script. Diana's written scripts. I mean, it does happen. And
That's an intriguing possibility, but the truth is I have so many stories speaking to me that it'll be hard to pull me away from those.
I don't want to encourage you, but I just thought, it's a possibility. Right. So was something else you said you wanted to talk about while we were drinking our wine? Now I can't remember what it was.
I was going to tell you about the next in the Cork O'Connor series.
Oh, wonderful. All right, speak up.
So I have one more Cork O'Connor novel under contract. And I had thought that I was going to put that on the back burner because for a very long time now, I have had an idea for a standalone that has been knocking at my door, begging me to write it. And also I was going to put it on the back burner because I really didn't have a good, compelling idea for the next Cork O'Connor manuscript. So I launched into the writing of that standalone, which was going swimmingly well. And then, here's a trope, like a bolt out of the blue, a great idea for the next Cork O'Connor story came to me. So I put the standalone aside, and for the last several months I've been at work on the next in the Cork O'Connor series. It doesn't have a title, and I won't tell you a lot about it, except that, God, I'm having fun writing this story.
That's so great, because as long as he's having fun, he'll keep writing them, right? So good news all the way around. Can you talk a little bit about the standalone that you've put aside?
I will just say briefly, it is, as I envision it, it will be a landlocked retelling of Moby Dick.
Oh, big theme there.
I believe in setting challenges for myself.
Wow. Okay. Well, on that note, I think we should take questions from the audience. So, feel free. Call away. Who would like to ask a question? Could you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question is, am I still writing at the St. Clair Broiler? For those of you who don't know where this question is coming from, for a very long time in St. Paul, there was an iconic cafe called the St. Clair Broiler, which opened its doors at 6 o'clock every morning. When I got serious about writing, Diana and I, my wife and I, were living about 2 blocks from the Broiler. Diana just entered law school. So I had become the sole support of the family, had a job, but I wanted desperately to be a writer. And so I pitched this idea to Diane. I said, if you're willing to get the kids up and fed and dressed and off to school so I can go write at the Broiler first thing every morning, I swear to you, when I come home from my job at the end of the day, I'll be the best husband, the best father you can possibly imagine. She bought it. So there I was at the Broiler every morning at 6 o'clock with my pen and my notebook in hand. 7 days a week, I wrote at the Broiler. The Broiler closed its doors at this point about 3 or 4 years ago. But I still continued until the pandemic to do my writing in coffee shops. Once the pandemic descended, we were supposed to shelter in place. I exchanged the coffee shop for my kitchen counter. Still get up 6 o'clock every day, 7 days a week. And my wonderful wife, Diane, has promised to stay in bed every morning until I finished my writing. So
Wow,
there you go.
That is a huge sacrifice.
I know.
Bravo, Diane.
What else? Any other? I saw a hand. Yep. Oh, the question is, do I know anybody who reminds me of Henry Malou? So here's where Henry Malou came from. Every writer, every storyteller understands there's magic involved in the stories you create. Things come to you and you have no idea where they come from. Henry Malou was one of those blessings that came to me from nowhere. He came to me actually out of a snowstorm. I was writing the first novel in the Cork O'Connor series, Iron Lake. It opens with this horrific snowstorm in northern Minnesota that nobody should be out in, but Cork is driving his old Bronco down the road that he can barely see the road. And there is a figure walking along the side of the road. Cork stops, beckons him in. The figure gets into Cork's bronco, takes off his hat, takes off his mittens, undoes his scarf, and Henry Malou revealed himself to me. And I sat back and thought, well, this is an interesting guy. Wonder what he's all about. I had no idea that Henry was going to play such a significant part in the rest of the series. I don't myself know Henry Malou, but I know he exists because all of my friends in the Ojibwe community have told me, oh, that's our elder so-and-so. Of course they know Henry. So he's out there. He's out there. Do you really? Was he Fond du Lac? Okay. Yep. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Do you know it's called the Cork O'Connor series? But Henry is everybody's favorite character. I'll tell you, I could probably kill off Cork and it would be okay as long as Henry was still there. Yeah, here. Okay. Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So really the question the question began with one of resources. Do we have resources for me to explore the history, the culture of the Native people in Minnesota? Of course we do. My library is full of resource material, early ethnographies, books on Ojibwe spirituality, Ojibwe myth, Ojibwe rituals, books by great Shanaab storytellers. So yes, we have all of that. Plus we have in St. Paul we have what's called the Minnesota History Center, which is an archive of all of the newspapers ever published in Minnesota, including the native newspapers, as well as first-person accounts of people who've lived through all of these periods, and photographs documenting all of the periods across the state. So lots of photographs of the Native people once photographs became possible. So there's a... So how much is writing and how much is research? A lot of research to make sure that I've done a good job representing the Ojibwe culture. A lot of checking in with my friends in the Ojibwe community to make sure I got it right. And then creating from this well of stories in my head, the stories that will do justice to the community and to those issues that I want to highlight. You commented on the fact that you had just visited Minnesota and you didn't see as many people as you might have expected that were clearly Native. Well, shoot. There are so many mixed people of mixed heritage that they are Ojibwe or they are Dakota, but you wouldn't recognize that in them. Minnesota, the Twin Cities actually has the largest Native population, urban population in the United States. You just have to go to the right areas. So they're there. You just didn't see them or recognize that you were seeing them. Because the native people in Minnesota look very different than the native people here in Arizona. Anything else? Yeah, back there. Do you know Minnesota? Okay, so the question is, why did I decide to set my series in northeastern Minnesota? Minnesota is a huge place, and with many interesting parts to that state. But here's why I chose the Northeast. I'm not native to Minnesota. I didn't move there until I was about 30 years old, when Diane was accepted to the University of Minnesota Law School. Soon after we moved to the Twin Cities, I live in St. Paul, we live in St. Paul, we began in the summer doing what everybody in the Twin Cities does in the summer. We went up north. So we began vacationing in the Northeast, what we call the Arrowhead, going to a YMCA camp that's north of Ely, Minnesota, which is the gateway to the Boundary Waters. And when I discovered that remarkable area, that incredibly beautiful area, I knew this is where I want to set my stories. So that's why I chose the Northeast. Yeah. Follow-up question. Do I know anybody like Cork O'Connor? So I am sometimes asked this question, are you Cork O'Connor? This is my response. Cork O'Connor. O'Connor is Irish. Krueger's not an Irish name. Cork is Catholic. I am Methodist. Cork has significant Native heritage. I have none. Cork has a long history in law enforcement. I spent a night in jail once. So there's a lot about Cork that's different from me. But how Cork sees the world is how I see the world. His moral compass is very like my moral compass. Cork believes that in this life you make commitments, and come hell or high water, you stand by those commitments. Cork believes that that one of the reasons we're put here is to seek justice for those who are in need of it, and I really believe that as well. Cork believes that in this life, family is probably the most important relationship that you're going to experience. I believe that as well. So a lot of who Cork is comes out of me, but Cork is so much bigger than I am. His shoulders across the course of the series have become so much broader. He incorporates a lot of the law enforcement people that I know and respect tremendously. There's a little bit of him, of some of my family members whom I respect in Cork. So he's kind of a Frankenstein in that regard. Thanks for asking. What else? Yeah.
There are multiple Ojibwe communities within Minnesota. Is there one in particular that you interact with more?
Most of my friends, the friends that I have in the Ojibwe community, have migrated out of the reservation. So I have a friend from Mille Lacs. I have a friend from Red Lake. I have a friend from Fond du Lac. So, they kind of come to the Twin Cities, and that's where I made their acquaintance. But I go back to visit them. I have a good friend, Monty Franck, who is really highlighted in Spirit Crossing, has been one of my great resources and a good friend. And so Diane and I have been up to visit Monty up at Mille Lacs a number of times. I go up to, if you know Minnesota, my reservation most resembles a reservation called the Boys Fort reservation, smaller reservation way up north at the edge of the Boundary Waters. And so I pop in there periodically whenever I'm in the Ely area to kind of touch base. But Red Lake, I have borrowed from Red Lake. I have borrowed from White Earth. In the book before this one, Fox Creek, I borrowed from the Leech Lake. So yeah, I kind of tap into the Native communities when there's something that particular community offers that I think this story could use.
I have a question. Has the casino culture that is so prevalent here in Arizona and New Mexico, has it penetrated Minnesota?
Yeah. I can tell there are other Minnesotans here. Yeah, we have lots of native casinos in Minnesota, and there's the good in that, and there's the bad in that. The good is that they have done those casinos that are successful, and they're not all successful. Those casinos that are successful contribute significantly to, particularly the infrastructure of a Native American community. So. Good water system, good waste system, clinics, schools, all of those come about as a result of the money that comes from the casinos. The flip side of that is that all of the, what we think of the dark aspects of gambling also come with the casinos. So it's the yin and the yang. In the Native community, they speak of Native American casinos as the new Buffalo. This is where they now are getting their income. But a lot of my friends in the Native community think that that gambling, particularly because it involves tapping into other people's weaknesses, is not a good thing for the Native community. So it's an issue within the Native community.
Anyone else have a question? No. Well, in that case, thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for coming out today. And also this. Thank you for buying your books from your local independent bookseller.
We really do appreciate it now, because I try most of the time to thank you by giving away a free book. I forgot, PK, to bring the book up, but there's a Kathy Reich's Ark up there on the counter. You got it? So that's the book I'm going to give away. How many numbers do we have? 27. Okay. So there's no actual logical connection between Kathy Reich's Forensic Anthropology Mystery, the new one, Fire and Bones, and Kent, except that it's the same publisher, and the covers have exactly the same colors, and there's the whole thing about bones and the potential for Cork O'Connor.
There is a forensic anthropologist
That's
involved
true,
in
and
this
there is
story.
as well. So anyway, if you would pick a number between 1 and 27, Pat has custody of this is my advanced reading copy, and for those of you who don't know what that is, since I have to schedule events and talk about books long before they actually publish, like today, for example, they send me what's called an advanced reading copy. Although, truthfully, they're getting rarer because in order to save money, they think I should read digital copies. And I have to tell you, at the age of 83, I can't adjust.
Yeah.
I can't remember a single word if I read it digitally. My memory, I can actually recall pages, where I've read, that. I have an eidetic memory, so it just doesn't work. Anyway, so I have to badger them, and a lot of the time now I get a bound galley, so I don't get the pretty book. But Kathy's book came to me, as Kent's book came to me, thank you, as a reproduction of what the actual book looked like. So pick a number between 1 and 27, was it? 1 and 27.
Unlucky 13 just became lucky.
Is number 13 here? You have to be here to actually win. Yes.
All right. Let's big hand over here.
Right. So there you are. We actually have autographed copies of Kathy's book, which she was kind enough to sign for us, as she has signed every book she's ever written for us, but I'm giving away the reading copy. So if you would like to get your book signed, your number is your place in the signing line. Would you be happy staying here
This is just
in
fine.
my seat, because it's easy for people to take
this
a
is just
photograph?
fine.
So if you'd like to take photos and talk to Kent, he's going to pop over here. If you could fold up your chairs and move them against that wall